and welcome to this interview series from the Feminist Library. My name is Jenny, and I'll be your host today. So before we start, the Feminist Library is a large collection of women's liberation movement literature based in London. We have an inclusive, intersectional feminism ethos, and our library is run by a team of really dedicated and really enthusiastic volunteers. We are making some incredible feminist content for all of you out there, so please like our videos and subscribe to our channel because we have more coming very soon. So I'm really pleased today to be joined by our very special guest, Yadira Sánchez Benítez. Hi, Yadira. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hiya.
So Yadira is a creative research software engineer working at the intersections of collaborative and community-based technological co-creation. We're going to get into what all of that means in just a moment. She organizes and researches to stand against the role of technology companies in oppressing migrant communities. Yadira's roots in rural culture have led her to develop a thought that centers the possibilities of imagining the use of technology for mutual, collective, and common enjoyment. Her doctoral project focuses on the digital divide as a social harm and the active and participatory co-designing of digital tools with communities to support community-based algorithmic ecosystems. In addition to all of that, she is also a research software engineer fellow at the Software Sustainability Institute. Yadira, wow, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. So can you share with us a little bit about your background and how your personal experiences intersect with your work?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Jenny. So yeah, my background, I guess I come from a little bit of software engineering, and right now I'm doing some research. But at the same time, I come from a rural, like I mentioned, cultural background. And so I'm trying to kind of intersect all of this in my work. So when I came to academia only a few months ago, I came with the mindset of how can I actually sort of express my background and at the same time do meaningful work with this. So yeah, sort of like I love technology, but at the same time, I really love working in community. And I think sometimes those two terms are not coupled together. So there's a lot of like solitude, for example, when people think of creating technology, people think of this geek genius kind of guys behind the computer creating these tools. And for me, that's never been like real or never really captured, I guess, my imagination. I've always been kind of like collective person. So I love creating in community. And I guess that's where I'm coming from. I'm trying to sort of like bring these kind of values and principles into technology.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I think it would be helpful for everyone who's listening if we unpack and define some of the terms that we're going to be speaking about today. So let's start with the digital divide and artificial intelligence. So what do these two terms mean, both in theory and in practice, and also in the context of your work?
Thank you. Yeah, well, I guess commonly, these terms are very loaded. They can mean so many things to everybody. But the digital divide, I guess, refers mostly to the gap between those who benefit from the digital age that we're seeing these days and those who do not. And artificial intelligence has become this like term to encompass kind of like a simulation of human intelligence processes by machines, especially computer systems. So specific applications of AI, for example, include like natural language processing, for example, like Google Translate, or speech recognition, or machine vision, like surveillance cameras. So yeah, AI essentially is this, like the theory and development of computer systems that are able to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence.
Now, your doctoral work, you are focusing on the digital divide as a social harm. Can you go into that a little bit and tell us currently, how is the digital divide being used to cause social harm?
Yeah, definitely. So again, because the digital divide is seen from many perspectives and contexts. The typical approach, I guess, from policymakers and researchers is one where there's a lot of focus in bridging this gap between those who have access to the digital age and those who do not. So I guess while this gap, it's definitely important and it signifies a type of harm for those who do not have access to this digital age, it also implies that there's some that do not have the capital and skills. So where is this coming from as well? So in a sense, there is kind of like a critical deconstruction of what it means for some and what it means for others to be in this digital divide. So I guess from my doctoral perspective, I'm seeing the digital divide sort of as, historically speaking, where the term comes from, which it was first seen back in the US, for example, in a lot of government policy making. And from then onwards, kind of like was driven by policy efforts equating to like progress, for example, and the digital connection. And this kind of like started seeing a lot of neoliberal ideas of economic progress, where a lot of governments kind of rushed to implement policies to connect everybody to the internet, for example, which meant that many who lived in remote areas like rural places did not have the capacity to be connected. But at the same time, so this I'm thinking this harm as, okay, who invented this term? And what was the idea behind this term? And why do we need to be connected in the first place? Who is running, I guess, the policies behind this? So yeah, I think I'm seeing the digital divide as this kind of like critical view.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So one of the things you're passionate about is taking a stand against artificial intelligence, AI, being used to oppress migrant communities and other marginalized communities. Can you tell us a little bit about how that's happening now and how that has happened in the past? How has AI been used and how is it being used to oppress migrant communities and other marginalized people?
Yeah, of course. So I like to think of AI and all technological tools as, I guess, artifacts that have ethical problems like anything that we might use in our everyday lives. And so in the same way that oppressive systems have other tools, or for instance, like police cars to police marginalized communities, the word ethical can also mean so many things and can be mistaken by these oppressive systems as well. So I guess for me, like I like to go beyond the term ethical, like considerations of AI and actually touch upon, I guess, the implications of this on justice. So one of the issues with AI tools, for example, like computer vision, which is used in a lot of surveillance cameras or biometrics, there is also the use of predictive technologies, I guess, in software policing. Automated systems as well that are being used to make decisions whether an individual might be entitled to essential services. And this can happen in the form of like workplace surveillance, for example, or credit checks, and also in welfare and social care. So I guess one example that it's not ongoing anymore in the UK, but it was kind of big. It was Hackney Council in 2019, ended a pilot scheme, which was called Troubled Families Program. And it was trying to profile race families for the borrowers' social workers. So it was prioritizing social care and work based on what this predictive software was saying. So there was a lot of uproar by certain communities and also collectives saying, well, okay, but how is this working? So they found out that a lot of this was actually processed by a private company. And when they were asked, so how does the data actually work? They couldn't really respond and they never gave access to this. So it is these things that you are wondering, okay, fair enough, let's use AI tools to help us, you know, speed things up and have access to things. But at the same time, is it actually being helpful or is it being more harmful? And in this case, we can see that a lot of the times it's very harmful.
Right, so it's marketed to the general public as something that will help them and something that will be helpful, but actually there's some more sinister purposes happening behind the scenes that they won't necessarily admit to.
Yeah, and most of the times, like they wouldn't have sinister like purposes behind, and like we know how oppressive systems work as well, right? Like they might say they don't have sinister ideas behind this, but they don't regard anything that can be harmful as harmful, so they just go ahead with it. Absolutely.
Right. Of course. So you're part of a really cool project called a new AI Lexicon. Can you tell us a little bit about this project, why it was created, and what you all are doing with it? And we're going to link to this project in the episode notes.
Thank you. Yeah, this was actually an open call by it's called the A Now Institute in New York. And it was an open call, I guess, to researchers and technologies, sort of to generate narratives that can offer perspectives from different geographical backgrounds and offer alternative forms of knowledge. And I guess a strategy as well to sort of help the path of AI tools to not follow the past and current path that we're seeing, which is social control and decision-making power that based on few people, and which also is very heavily westernized. So it's based on a lot of ideas and purposes that come from Northern countries. And I guess what they were trying to do was to attend to other global racial histories or dynamics, struggles, and also needs, for example. And so when I read this, I thought, well, yeah, definitely, like it kind of like my work ticks all of these things, or at least some. And it was really exciting to actually be part of, okay, how can we see AI in a different way?
Yeah, absolutely. And in your contribution to the new AI lexicon, you use a term, and I want to make sure I'm pronouncing it correctly, techiology.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Great. So could you tell us a little bit about why you've proposed to use this term in this context, and what is the origin of it? What does it mean, and all of that good stuff?
Yeah, sure. So I actually first read this term back in 2020. It was an article by a prominent indigenous mixed linguist and activist in Mexico. Her name is Jasnaya Aguilar. And in which so the article was implying a modest proposal to save the world by calling out Silicon Valley fake green tech, for example, and instead kind of use this new solution, but also old, that has been used by many towns in Mexico and other Latin American countries as well. So many towns in Mexico, we call it tequio, which is a form of collaborative effort and, like, I guess, mutual support in the community, where we create solutions to everyday needs or challenges that we may have. For example, when a primary school needs new material, then we come in assembly and we talk, okay, this is what is needed for the community right now, how we're going to approach this. So she is kind of proposing that in order to, well, not fix, but I guess to approach the climate emergency that we're facing, how about we talk to each other in our communities and see what is best for our context, rather than, I guess, expecting Silicon Valley and governments to solve the issues, which so far hasn't been very fruitful.
Techiology ties back to what you've mentioned about you're drawn to community efforts, and you're a big proponent of collaborative community organizing and proposing community solutions and things like that. So what does techiology mean in the context of your work and the projects that you're working on now?
I guess so, like, working in the space of AI and like creating software technologies, I have seen a lot of the conversation revolves around so-called like experts, and it has a very top-down approach as to how it should be conceived or deployed a technology or AI tool, for example, which I think for me is one of the biggest drawbacks and, I guess, challenges really when it comes to technology. So these powerful tools of automation, as I mentioned in the article, require a lot of significant like computational resources. And so if we look at who has the resources to access this or the capital, it's pretty quickly obvious that is big technological companies or universities or government research institutions, for example. So I guess for me, for AI tools to embrace an idea of technology or collective decision making in a way, it would have to include the community's knowledge and the feedback that the community gives back to the possibility of deploying a technology or creating it in the first place. So I guess in the specific context that I give in the article is farming communities like mine, for example, where we can see an increasing number of AI applied to agricultural programs, for instance, in Mexico. And what we're seeing with these programs is that they offer a lot of hope that AI will benefit farmers and farming in general, where, well, as we can see, land management is becoming more difficult due to high, variability in rainfall and water scarcity, which comes from the climate emergency that we're facing as well. And so if we look back also the historical, I guess, power dynamics in who has to do with this climate emergency, we can realize that it has become worse due to industrial and exploitative practices outside the farmer's power. So we're in a position where people didn't create the problem, but they have to face what has happened because of this. So yeah, the idea of Tequiology is the community that is facing this challenge has to be centered because they did not create the problem in the first place. So yeah, that's the idea behind this.
Right. Yeah, thank you so much for explaining. That's really fascinating. And you mentioned the climate emergency, but we across the globe were facing so many crises caused by capitalism, racial violence, gender violence, border violence, and now the pandemic has just made all of those things worse for a lot of people. So what role do you think technology plays across all of these different crises that we're facing globally?
Yeah, it definitely plays a great role. I think there has been a huge separation of responsibility and accountability in the outcomes of the technologies, I guess, that have been created so far, like production technologies in, farming and meat and so on. And the ethics of any technological tool have in many ways failed to even consider the harm, either intentionally or not. So there has been a lot of lack of foresight to the future. And that's what we're seeing many of the problems we're seeing today. And also, I guess, who has been having access to creating these tools and for what reasons is at the center of many of the crises we're seeing. So I guess the obvious one is the accumulation of capital and power under few institutions, I guess, and governments. So yeah, I guess people and government continues to allow those with the capital to keep creating technologies, which are not for the greater good. And we're seeing that this is actually for market reasons to progress the economy, right? And so we see this digital periphery where sorting and controlling, I guess, certain geographies and bodies excludes marginalized populations. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of very different digital worlds at the same time being created. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of farming communities, a lot of migrant communities in countries around the world are being impacted by the climate emergency we're having. And like you said, these are problems that these communities did not cause, but they're the ones who are left dealing with the impacts, the fallouts, and their lives are going to suffer as a result of what's happening. So can you tell us a little bit about the intersections between the digital technologies and the climate emergency that we're facing, and why you feel it's so critical that we need to reimagine technology, the way it's used, who owns it, who benefits from it, and all of the things that you emphasize in your work?
Yeah, thank you. I guess the more that we're seeing that we're digitizing the economy, for example, the more intrinsic this relationship becomes with the climate emergency, because it is so tied to the idea of producing and producing and producing, either be goods or information, for example, in the digital world. So I guess, yeah, definitely, like you mentioned, it's critical to consider the impact that this digitized economy has on the environment, but also are there any ways of actually doing technology that is sustainable? And if not, then what should we be doing about it? So I guess here it would be a great idea to recall what a lot of indigenous populations are doing around the world, especially in Latin America. We know that they have been at the forefront of protecting the environment, for example, and they have been using what the West might call rudimentary technologies to protect the forest, but which in fact have been proven to be very effective to actually protect the environment. So it's, I guess, this thing of looking back, are we actually doing it right? Or do we need to take a step back and stop using certain technologies?
Absolutely. And what you've said about, is it possible to use technology sustainably? That's a very big question. And I have another big question for you, which is, in your expert opinion, do you feel it's possible to use technology to minimize harm?
Yeah, actually, I really struggled with this question because I do love technology, and I think it definitely can be used to minimize harm. It depends, I think, on the priorities that we have in mind when we create this technology, and also how realistic we're being in how helpful it can be or cannot be. So I think there is a lot of emphasis we're putting on technological solutions without actually looking, is this a viable solution using technology? And so I think without failing in this idea of what some people call techno-solutionism, is that technology will fix all our challenges, we can perhaps focus instead on ways that it can give us a helping hand and sort of like to aid the process of sustainability rather than doing the whole sustainable process itself. So I think, there's definitely ways.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's a big question, and I think it's one that a lot of people struggle with. And related to the question about minimizing harm, you are a big advocate of centering community care when it comes to technology, when it comes to AI, when it comes to digital solutions. Can you just explain a little bit more about why you choose to center care and what your ideal vision for the future of tech might look like in that way?
Yeah, thank you. So I based a lot of this work on many authors that have done a lot of like liberatory technological imagination. So there's a huge, I'm a huge fan of this author called Ruha Benjamin. And she talks a lot about captivating technology in a way that is focused on the liberation of I guess, just society at large and everyone that's part of it. So she talks a lot about how we can reframe technologies to kind of like care for us rather than we always having this idea of having to take care of what the technology does for us. So in a way, it's kind of like, I guess using technology for our own like good and actual allowing us to rest in a way that is actually non-counterproductive to other beings that we're around. So I guess in this sense, also taking into account that we're living kind of in harmony also with the environment. So like animals and plants, how can we create technology that is not disrupted to the land, for example, as we have seen, I guess, with mining companies in Latin America. So the opposite of that, what would that be? Would it be that we don't go to these lands and perhaps we don't have to create or go about these technologies, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So because this is the Feminist Library, of course, we have to talk about feminism. So I'm curious how your personal feminist politics influence your work, and do you think that feminism has a role to play in creating a more equitable technological world for everybody out there?
Yeah, definitely. I also draw a lot of this from feminist activists in Latin America. They have done some great activism and research that is contextual to Latin America, I guess. And they use a lot of ideas based on transfeminism for both critically viewing technology, but also to build technology. So they see tech, I guess, as currently being designed in a way that it helps to maintain the status quo of social inequality and the norms of, consumerism, misogyny, racism, and so on. And so they asked this question, what would the future look like if we could hack these trends that we're seeing across? And I see this, I guess, as a space where we can hack and reinvent technology with feminist principles in mind. And I guess like access, for example, movement, freedom of expression, but also the embodiment of our own bodies. So all of them mean so many things, I guess, to many people, but there are some great examples of cooperatives out there that I know in Latin America, at least, that are doing on the ground work. For example, working with the queer community or the sex workers community, creating spaces where they can also feel safe. So I guess this goes back to creating technologies of care for everybody. And yeah, I guess that's kind of like my idea of feminism when it comes to building technologies.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. So you've mentioned you come from a rural community, and one of your focuses in your work is reimagining what technology can look like for rural communities. Can you talk a little bit about, have any solutions been put forward by different researchers in this space, or who is at the forefront of proposing reimagining alternatives as you talk about how you feel that's very important?
Yeah, actually a lot of, I guess, the reimagining or hacking of digital technologies and cyberspaces has come mostly from the periphery or the margins in urban environments, for example, in big cities like in Mexico City, and also like outsiders. There's a lot of cooperative movement in indigenous rural communities in Mexico, where they are coming together to actually form their internet cooperatives and build their own infrastructure. So there is this autonomy of, this is my internet, this is my infrastructure. But also there's a lot of citizen-led databases, for example. I've seen this, I guess, intersection of some researchers in Mexico, at least, where they're coming with citizens to kind of form an alliance and bring what the academic can bring to these communities. And one of them has been citizen-led databases, for example, in forensics, which has been very fruitful actually. And even though it's kind of like a touchy subject for many Latin Americans, it has to do with creating databases that help families of the disappeared to actually keep track of what is happening, but it's at the hands of the citizens rather than the government, which in a way is a form of digitally embracing technology for you without having any interception from state bodies, for example, and misuse as well. So yeah, there has been, I haven't, unfortunately, I don't know much about what happens in the West. So because I'm mostly focused in Latin America, I know that there's definitely a lot happening in this space. And that's where I take most of, like, I guess my inspiration to, because I'm quite strongly connected to what happens there. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of initiatives and great work in this space.
Yeah, it'd be interesting if we could include maybe some organizations in Latin America in the episode notes that people could learn more about this. So I'll make sure to get those from you and we can include that.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's talk about power dynamics, ownership, and agency. So in a new AI lexicon, I'd like to read one of your quotes out loud, if that's okay, and maybe we can go into it more. So you pose the question, is any AI tool actually needed to aid the hardships currently faced by farmers? And do they fully understand the implications of such technologies in their spaces, or how they can actively be a part of the process? Or is it more of a question of power imbalances where the farmers are seen as another point of exploitation in the race to technically fix the effects of climate change? So in your work and in your research, what have you learned about power dynamics, about ownership, and about agency, and how technology ties all of these things together and has the possibility to give communities this power?
Yeah, I think there has been devastatingly abuse of power by government and tech companies that has caused extensive harm to communities. So particularly among people who are the most vulnerable in those communities. And so I think any form of reappropriating technologies for our own community's good is a great step to actually disrupt also the power imbalances. So this is more easily said than done, of course, but we can see that a lot of collectives and communities are doing work in many different ways. So one of them is actually resisting, for example, violent technology. Another one is hacking the space and actually reappropriating the space so that it actually benefits what you're trying to do with your community. I guess imagination also plays a great part in how we would like to engage in not just, I guess, our research, my research, but also like actively engage with like disrupting these violent technologies by bringing the community's actual experiences. So I think here is kind of very tricky because we can see that a lot of communities have already passed through a lot of trauma by violent technology. So we don't want to bring them into the active conversation of also putting themselves at recreating something that they did not create, right? So I guess this is where like the work of like solidarity by people who can be allies or who can have the chance to actually look from another perspective or not have this this experience of being directly oppressed by institutions is how can we create allyship to disrupt these technologies so that it benefits not only the communities that are vulnerable, but everyone, because at the end of the day, there is this, I guess, there is like a lot of confusion I see when it comes to technologies where I see it in my own circles, I guess, and family members, where we may think that a certain technology it's great and everyone is so excited to go about it. And it's like, oh my God, the camera can recognize my face. That is so cool. I can do, great things. But at the same time, because we are not used to coming from a context of how it's been used, for instance, to trace refugees in the UK, it's how can we start having a conversation of this technology is great, but is it really? How great is it? How much impact is creating to other communities? And at the same time, I guess this goes back to the process of techiology, of how we can come together in a form of assembly, I guess, to talk about the issues that are actually pressing to the community. There is, again, this is way easier said than done here, because you would like to see a way in which, obviously, the power of the community, which is great, can completely disrupt these super powerful institutions like the government or big tech. And I think we are gonna get there. It's gonna take a while probably, but yeah, I think there's a lot of great work being out there.
Which that leads perfectly into my next question, which is, do you think that big tech companies are on board with this, with creating a more just, a more equitable technological solutions and digital experience for everybody? Or are they just telling us what we want to hear and saying one thing to the public and behind the scenes doing another thing?
Yeah, I think, we probably know the answer to this already. So one great example was the firing of this prominent AI researcher in the US, Dr. Timney Gebru. So in addition to actually raising red flags about Google research, the company responds to her criticism over this. I mean, it wasn't criticism. She was pointing some very serious flaws in the research, and she was not agreeing to deploy it because it was going to be harmful. And so what Google did was they did not respond as you may wish to respond when you know there's potential harm. So they fire her over this, and also display complete disregard for its workers. And obviously there was an alarming lack of accountability in the whole process. So yeah, she was fired, and she continues until this day being very vocal about the importance of having external and independent AI research institutes, like her own, which was created, I think, last week. She founded her own institute, but also to have frameworks of accountability, which should not be run by the same people as she mentions. So the agendas also of research, government, and big tech should not be, at the forefront of the accountability process either. So I guess to this, I'm seeing also a lot of people like raising their voice on this issue, and this is one of the groups I really like being involved with other colleagues, where we run campaigns and research, trying to actively disrupt the links of violent technology, and also like higher education. What's the role of universities in sending students to these spaces that also have like this super strong link with hostile immigration environments? And I guess one of the campaigns that we run was last year, was in solidarity with Timney, I guess, and some other campaigns that we run was Palantir US company that came to the US and make surveillance software, came to the UK and make surveillance software. And it was found to be actively engaging in recruitment fairs at universities, for example. So what we're trying to do here is make our colleagues aware of what these companies are doing, is what the harms that they're doing to other communities as well. And so, yeah, I think groups and collectives are an important way of keeping these tech firms accountable. Yeah.
So we're going to share links to your work in the episode notes, but I am positive that there are people listening out there who want to know, okay, now what? What do I do? And this is often where people feel very powerless, which is where I think the power of a collective can really give them some legitimacy in terms of, oh, wow, there are other people who care about these things, and there are people who are fighting for the same things I am. So could you tell us about some groups or some collectives that people can check out if they're interested to know more?
So yeah, there's many actions, I guess, that people can join, or any group. So one of them is obviously No Tech for Tyrants, which I am part of. And we are continuously looking for people who want to be part of the campaigning or the research. We currently have a lot of potential work and exciting projects that we want to engage in the UK. We are trying to also bring a lot of perspectives that have been implemented in the US, for example, and that have been very successful in the accountability process towards violent technology. And one of these examples is the Migrant Latin American run group, which tries to protect immigrant rights and also runs campaigns against violent technology there. We have, if people are interested in more academic circles, there is a lot of work done by the Ada Lovelace Institute, for example, that focuses on bias in technology here in the UK. There's many in the United States, like the Algorithmic Justice League, that looks into these issues as well. We have the Data Justice Lab, I believe, here in Cardiff University, that does a lot of amazing work as well, where we can see how data has been misused in many UK contexts. We have Foxglove. I believe they do run a lot of campaigning as well with immigrant communities in the UK. So they do have running campaigns and research projects as well. So yeah, I hope that helps.
So there's a lot out there, and there's a lot of opportunities for
Yeah.
people to get involved and join a collective and be amongst people who are trying to make a change.
Definitely.
Amazing. So could you tell us about some of your upcoming projects? What are you working on now? What have you got coming up in the next month or year?
Yeah, definitely. I think the coming month is going to be a little bit quiet because everyone is looking forward to the holidays and just having some rest. But yeah, we're so with No Tech for Tyrants, we are potentially starting a project in which we want to look at the abuse of technology by police in the UK. So that's gonna be, I think, quite exciting, probably a little bit nerve-wracking, But yeah, I'm really looking forward to that, definitely.
So if people are interested in getting involved with No Tech for Tyrants, they can just go to the website and sign up. Is that how it works?
Yeah, definitely. Get in contact with us. I believe there is an email on the webpage. Otherwise, on Twitter, yeah, we're always open to messages, and if people want to actively get involved, absolutely.
So Yadira, where can our audience find you on social media? Can you give us your handles and let us know where we can follow you in your work?
Yeah, of course, I'll pass them to you. You can find me on Instagram, and I'm on Twitter as well. So yeah, I look forward to being in contact.
Okay, great. We'll make sure to post links to your Twitter and your website and your other social media spots in the episode notes. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. And I guess my final question is there anything that we didn't talk about that you'd like to discuss?
Yeah, there was a lot of that we touched upon. So it was really exciting to share with everyone today. And I hope that is useful in some way or another. And I look forward to collaborate with anybody if they want to come forward. And yeah, let's recreate technologies and work together towards it. Thank you.
That's amazing. And we'll put your contact details in the episode notes as well so people can get in touch if they're interested with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me and for discussing your really important work. And I think what you're doing is amazing, and I'm looking forward to following your career. And thank you to everybody out there who's listening. We hope you enjoyed this wonderful discussion with Yadira Sánchez Benítez. If you'd like to learn more about the Feminist Library, please visit our website at feministlibrary.co.uk. We've got a lot of great events coming up, and you can also sign up to volunteer if you're interested. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at the Feminist Library. And of course, please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interviews coming soon.